Hello, my name is Brad Lyles, and I'm coordinating an effort to pull together a group of local Republicans who can communicate with each other easily online with email initially. A group that is restricted access and invitation only. Hopefully you're watching this video because I mentioned I would describe the project in more detail on my YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel only contains this video. Anyway, you probably noticed that, like Thomas Paine said back in 1775, in the most read pamphlet in America at that time, called Common Sense, when he said, "These are the times that try men's souls." And I think we're kind of in those times again. We might not have been, many of us haven't been interested in politics pretty much ever. I mean, I have for the last 40 years as a conservative activist, but most people, aren't really involved in, the debates and stuff about policies, tax policy or corporate welfare or whatever. They would maybe get together with friends or family and have, arguments and debates about that stuff. But that was before. Now, even if we're not interested in politics, politics is interested in us. Just take, for example, the fact that Congress recently voted to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. Well, there aren't that many rich people to go after on the part of 87,000 new IRS agents. There just aren't. So guess who they're going to be coming after? Me and you, the middle class, even the lower middle class. And you know what? Given today's current environment of two-tiered justice system and the political weaponization of every organization and police law enforcement agency in our society, I would bet that those 87,000 new IRS agents are not going to be focused on whomever the friends of the current administration are. Meaning that if you're not on the right political side of the equation, you might be in for a little more scrutiny by the new IRS. And even now, Congress hasn't indicated definitively that they're going to, defund that spending earmark or whatever. Now, this is not even to mention the fact that we now have a president who calls half of America ultra MAGA, semi-fascist, ultra MAGA, violence-prone, anti-constitutional, domestic terrorist extremists, and with no significant evidence for any of that. I keep wondering when they're going to point out who these domestic terrorists are and show us their pictures and the groups they're in. But we never quite see any of that because it's not there. Whereas there's a lot of crime increasing in our county, cities and towns, and DAs are definitely letting out people and not charging people who've committed violent crimes. And at the same time that the FBI has active investigations open on parents, fathers and mothers of school children, on parents who go to school board meetings and maybe at times aren't polite, but don't threaten anybody and don't say anything illegal. Yet they're under investigation, or the threat of investigation, because they can read too, and they can read when it was discovered that the American Association of School Boards had written the Attorney General at the direction of the White House, asking that parents be investigated and considered domestic terrorists if they made school board officials feel uncomfortable. That's kind of a big ask, but the Department of Justice actually took that seriously. And how things have changed locally is kind of a concern as well in every community in America. K through 12 education is now not only providing poor education, which we've come to expect in the last 20 years, but they also, even in schools you would never imagine this to be the case, even in conservative areas, they're essentially indoctrinating the kids in racist theory, called so-called critical race theory. Training our children that if they're white, they're racist, and if they're black, they're oppressed victims. That's great. And also emphasizing race above all else, when pretty much ever since Martin Luther King said, you should judge a man by his character, not the color of his skin. Ever since then, pretty much everybody was agreed that judging people by race was not only stupid, and not only impolite, but immoral. So how many years has that been? 60 years. 60 years since the Civil Rights Act, 60 years since the Equal Opportunity Employment Act, and on and on and on. And somehow, in the second decade of the 21st century, all of this stuff has come back to haunt us, and now Caucasians are being called names and castigated and openly discussed as nefarious, evil people, who even whiteness, so-called whiteness, has been castigated as evil and that needs to be wiped out. So our kids aren't being ignored. Oh, also in schools, right on the heels of critical race theory, we found out they were indoctrinating our kids in transgender theory, and telling them, even kindergartners on up, that, well, everybody needs to decide what sex they are and choose their own gender. And if you're unsure, that might indicate that you're a member of the opposite sex or no sex at all. This is blatantly anti-science, anti-evidence, anti-facts, anti-data, anti-common sense, and in many respects, child abuse itself. I mean, sexualizing children has been a crime for as long as anybody can remember. The term for people that are interested in sex with children, pedophiles, child molesters, that category of criminal is the most reviled even in prisons. And now we have adults conversing with children without even their parents' knowledge about them having a different sex than the one they were born with, and about how to express oneself sexually freely. Some of the materials you've probably heard and seen on TV, that there are many school books in schools now that have graphic depictions of the best way to perform oral sex, etc., and so forth. It's really kind of shocking. So even if we're not into politics, politics is now really into us, and really in our face. And when you keep getting slapped in the face, it's usually time to take notice of who's slapping you and how to make it stop. Anyway, because of all that, and because of my work historically as a conservative activist, I realized that there really was not a local, grassroots, flexible communication structure for solid Republicans or conservatives. Not people who were in doubt about their affiliations, but pretty definitely pro-American, pro-democracy, pro-republicanism, pro-constitution, people with common sense, but also with a drive to do something about this stuff. Like, what can we can we do? How can we do it? When can we do it? How can we figure it out? I mean, we all, many of us watch Tucker or listen to Steve Bannon's War Room or Jack Posobiec or Charlie Kirk, and on and on and on. But, they come up with intermittent good ideas for getting active. And there's so many options they seem to come up with on a state and national basis. But none of them really translate to local, on the ground action. And that seems to be where all of us can do the most good. But then you have to actually have a group of people that you can communicate with, to share information about what's going on, to react quickly to inappropriate votes on the city council, and so forth. You need to have people who can react quickly to help candidates who might be struggling to get elected at the end phase of a candidacy or campaign. You might want to have you want to have the capacity though to essentially pull together the troops in a moment's notice. I'll give you kind of a paranoid example, but this unfortunately has happened to a lot of the people that we know and care about. What if the FBI shows up at your door because you got a little too rowdy at the school board meeting, and even though you didn't make threats, you were impolite, and they show up with a search warrant for all your devices, and also they want to look through your house. Pretty much can't do anything right at that moment in that particular place. But if you have a local, within driving distance, within walking distance group of fellow Republicans and conservatives, you can send out an email, or if you have their contact information, a cell phone call, a text, and let them know what's happening. And probably within about a half an hour, you're going to have 25 people on your front lawn with cameras filming everything that's going on. Not creating a conflict, not being aggressive, not yelling, not screaming, not doing any of that mess, but essentially being a proactive force and support for you. And also, sending a message to the local law enforcement, the FBI branch, etc., that, all of these things, the door kicking in of journalists and so on and so forth, that they're not going to go unnoticed any longer. They're not going to be stories on Tucker that we hear about indirectly happening, in 3 states over. That all of that stuff is now going to be spread, documented, commented upon, put on all the platforms, every single one. And in our local area, we can play our part in doing that. There's also, the issue of support. Many of us in the conservative movement, or just not in the movement, conservatives, nowadays it's increasingly hard to even go to your family members for support, who are, staunch Democrat apologists, leftists. And even though you love them, and, in the past, they'd think that we were misguided and we'd think they were misguided, but, there was no doubt that we all wanted to help our fellow man and help the country. That's changed. A lot of our family members have been indoctrinated in K through 12 education, and certainly in college and universities. And they have money, they have skin in the game. They have like $50,000 debts. And so, of course, they're going to be even more indoctrinated because, their money, they'd feel kind of foolish if they had gotten all that gender studies education and paid for it, and then would have to come to the realization that it didn't help much with jobs or anything else. Whereas if they maintain the ideology, they can believe they're social justice warriors, fighting for the common man and doing good. That's a lot better than feeling foolish about wasting $50,000. So it's really, and at work, you're not going to really out yourself as a conservative at work in a lot of cases, because work is the place that human resources has instituted critical race theory required training, and transgender theory required training, and making sure that you use the right pronouns, changing the English language, making sure that you don't misgender anyone. An interesting example is in Northern Virginia. I think it's Loudoun County, where all the school moms who are staunch Democrats suddenly became pro-Glenn Youngkin for governor, Republican supporters. Even after all of that, the Loudoun County School Board passed a resolution that students who were in 4th grade and above would be suspended if they misgendered a classmate. This stuff is psychotic. And if you think that it's limited to just the schools, no. Go to the websites of the Pediatric Association of America, American Pediatrics, and the American Medical Association, and look up their policy. They usually will have it right on the front, the home page. Look at their policy on affirming transgenderism, of support for sex reassignment surgery, otherwise known as sexual mutilation, and not just those topics, but in children, in teenagers, in people who otherwise legally would not be capable of giving legal informed consent. It's like pretty much if someone is 18 and identifies themselves as transgender and wants to take hormone blocking therapies or get sexual reassignment, I don't think anybody with a good conscience is going to have a problem with that. I mean, we love everybody. And if you're gay, transgender, bisexual, identify as an alien, no, most people don't really care as long as you're a nice person and not harming anyone. But the problem is that now they're trying to chemically castrate prepubertal children because kind of if you're going to do hormone blocking, it's not really pertinent if you don't block the hormones when a child is pre-adolescent. So that means you're giving 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old children drugs like Lupron, which is what's used in prisons and outpatient programs for pedophiles to knock out their sex drive. And we're giving that to kids. And a lot of our academic institutions, government institutions are supporting this. It's like, this is psychosisville. By the way, our society has become pretty much psychotic when you consider that psychosis formally is one of two or both symptom patterns, one of hallucinations, and I'm not saying our society is hallucinating, but delusions are fixed false beliefs unchangeable by facts or logic. Remember, unchangeable by facts or logic. So if you think the guy behind the tree over there is an FBI agent and your friend says, well, how do you know? And you say, because he's got a coat on that FBI agents wear, and their friend says, well, that's not really logical. I mean, what is the FBI interested in you for anyway? And your friend just is not persuaded otherwise. They're convinced that the FBI guy is the guy behind the tree. And that they're listening, to his communications. Well, maybe nowadays they are listening to your communications. But I guess on a side note, Edward Snowden actually, that's the main thing he revealed, is that the NSA was recording all electronic communications, text, cell, etc., in the United States in some gigantic server farms in Idaho or wherever. But that they were recording all that, as a massive data trove to go after retroactively if they wanted to, investigate anyone without a warrant. So let me see, lest I get off track there. These things are happening every day. In fact, there's almost a new political story in the news that has to do with your neighborhood, your community, your safety, your family's safety, your future, and the future of your kids and grandchildren. Yet you're not really ever offered any means by which to respond productively. How do you band together with local like-minded citizens? Well, that's what this work group is constructed to address. Is imagine the power, let's say, within a 5-mile radius, 300 conservatives, Republicans, who know how to contact each other in that community. They may not have met each other, they probably won't, but they know how to communicate via email. And they have the convenience of an email address that they can address any of the emails they want to. So they can address the whole group. So they can essentially reach in the space of 5 seconds a group of 300 like-minded individuals, some of whom at that particular point in time would be interested in getting involved in a project that they're interested in, or if they're not, and contributing energy to addressing a particular issue that has come up or a long-standing issue. Like I said before, helping with campaigns, last-minute phone calls, or activity to support candidates. Like I think I mentioned, essentially sponsoring in-home meet and greets in the neighborhood for candidates, finding out about candidates and the current issues that are being addressed, such as, the local election integrity efforts that are popping up all over the U.S. Probably heard of the Precinct Committeeman Project, started by Dan Schultz. They're advertising it all the time on the Steve Bannon show, in terms of grassroots activism to take over, as a matter of sorts, the Republican Party leadership structure. Think about the power of, let's say, a group member finds out that the FDA is considering whether or not to authorize emergency use authorization, to authorize the use of the COVID vaccine in 5-year-olds down to 6-month-olds. And they have a public comment period, but nobody finds out about it till the last minute. And so within the next 24 hours or 48 hours, the public is invited to submit comments to the website. And so you think, okay, I'll submit a comment and think, say that I think it's inappropriate or whatever. And, that I think it's kind of ridiculous that even though no studies, no research, etc., support doing such a thing, and there's a lot of research that shows the potential harm of doing it, that it's kind of stupid, and they need to kind of table this for another moment in the future. But let's say you have access to this group of 300 Republicans in your local area. You can email the group, or if you know their contact numbers, text, etc., and invite everybody to make a quick comment. You can put a link in an email that takes them right to the comment page, so they don't have to search around for it and bother with all that. So in 30 seconds to 60 seconds, you've got all these other people that are going to be making comments too, and it probably doesn't stop there, because when you contact a group of the 300 fellow Republicans in your neighborhoods, you're going to also be contacting indirectly everybody that they know and that they contact. So let's say maybe 30 people get the email or look at it in time, or let's say 50, and let's say 30 actually decide to send in a comment. But those 30 people, and even up to the 50, pretty much have friends or neighbors or family that they think might be interested. And so all of a sudden you start having 200 to 300 messages within the space of hours or 24 hours posted on the FDA site. Well, they ignore scattered messages, but 300 messages, they'll ignore that too, of course, I guess, but it can make a difference. It really makes a difference, however, in trying to lobby U.S. House members and U.S. Senate members, and definitely U.S. State House members. For example, senators' offices, senators actually pay attention to the phone calls that come in through the Senate switchboard or directly to their office. They pay attention to that. So let's redo that exercise that we did for the FDA public comment, and let's talk about, say, the Senate is about to vote on the infrastructure bill, which, as you know, essentially was a revised Green New Deal with billions of dollars spent on things that are actually going to harm our circumstances. And you have strong feelings about the fact that we don't have any money to pay for it, and since we're going to have to print money to pay for it, it's going to cause even worse inflation than we have. And so you pass that around to the email structure of the work group, and everybody, well, let's say 200 people actually see the email because they sign on in time to see it before the bill gets voted on, and let's say maybe 50 people are up to making a phone call. And the person that sends out the message, very quickly says, emails what it's about, and more importantly, gives a link to the office phone numbers of the senators. You can find those lists anywhere you want, and a link to the Senate switchboard. And since they've probably done this before, they also let the group know, hey, if you do this, you can just do it at night and leave a message. That has a lot of impact. But let's say, even if you call during the day, it's really weird, but Senate staffers, even some House staffers, they actually pay attention. They don't blow you off. They listen politely, and reportedly they actually record these phone calls and what the content was, so that the senator actually knows what the citizens are saying. And imagine it's not just you finding out about this and calling in. Let's say of course you're going to want to let your organizations know that are like-minded, like obviously the Republican Party, but you call there anyway. So you call your list of 300 group members, and what do? You essentially say, okay, here's the information, and here's why it's easy to do, and here's why it makes a big difference. And all of a sudden, instead of like maybe 50 people that decide to go ahead and call in and go through the 60-second, 180-second hassle of doing that, and knowing that it's pretty low impact, they talk to all their friends and family who might be interested in doing so, and kind of PO'd about the fact that inflation is going to go up another % because of this boondoggle. And all of a sudden, you have like 350 people calling the Senate switchboard in the space of, let's say, 1 or 2 days. Well, that definitely gets a politician's attention. It's hard to imagine, but it really does. And the problem is, for Senate communications, and even House now, you can't email them anymore for the most part. Definitely not the senators. It has to be a letter, and then you can't even get their fax numbers to fax them. So it pretty much comes down to a letter, which is a pain, or a phone call. And the phone calls are really powerful. Let's say a group member, let me give another example. Let's say a group member finds out that there are a number of physicians and developing institutions that are very concerned about the toxic effects of the COVID vaccines, and concerned that this information is not getting out, and concerned that nobody knows that the mRNA technology leads the mRNA COVID vaccines to be deposited in all tissues in the body to affect blood clotting, to be deposited in the ovaries and the testes of developing fetuses and children, and that we have no idea about the downrange effects of that on fertility, overall health, etc. And especially that it's totally ridiculous to do all this when there's no evidence showing that otherwise healthy young adults, teenagers, and especially children have any significant negative effects from COVID at all, much less hospitalization or death. I think pretty much no healthy child has died from COVID since the beginning of the pandemic. I'm probably wrong in that. I think some people say, maybe 50 or 60 out of the millions of children in the country, but that pretty much the risk from influenza is now understood to be greater than the risk to children of COVID. And so let's say that information gets out there and prevents a lot of people from taking the 3rd, 4th, and 5th boosters. Also, the information shows that there's high likelihood that your immunity goes down with each additional booster. That's kind of weird, certainly paradoxical, but you can read about that in the link that group member sends you, and you can decide for yourself if the literature they're referring to, the reference, is reliable or not. Because you certainly nowadays don't want to pay attention to whatever the FDA, i.e. government, is telling you when they tell you that, oh, all these vaccines are safe and secure and fully tested. Well, even Great Britain doesn't believe that anymore. They've banned vaccines under age 11, and I think it's the Netherlands or Norway or one or more of the European countries have banned it for anybody under like 50. So somebody's seeing something out there that's a little concerning. And then What about all the information about treatment for COVID in the beginning and even in the middle of the pandemic? If you look up the NIH, National Institutes of Health website, or the CDC or the FDA website, they all talked about get the vaccine, and that was kind of it. So I guess go home and die if you've had the vaccine but you still get COVID, which pretty much everybody did, or go on a ventilator, which was kind of stupid because that pretty much was a death sentence half the time anyway. So they didn't talk about the fact that there were massive studies even back then, even in the beginning, that interventions like plain old vitamin D supplementation. I mean, I'm sorry, just vitamin D supplementation could reduce the risk massively of hospitalization and death, even in old people, even in compromised people. That if you got your level above 50, pretty much you were guaranteed of not dying. And that's regardless of anything else. And then, of course, they, nowhere do they talk about the studies that show that like baby aspirin every day prevented the clotting risks of COVID, or of course hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which has since been almost disallowed by hospitals and doctors for prescribing in pharmacies, which is the most ridiculous thing on earth. Because why? Because whole countries and whole regions in India and Brazil, with regular prophylactic ivermectin use, essentially experienced minimal, if any, COVID infection or spread just because of those interventions. Now, why is that the case? Well, logically, you can assume that's the case because there are lots and lots of studies that show that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine inhibit the replication of viruses. And then also there's lots of studies that show that masks don't do anything. So anyhow, the group member that has come across that information would email everybody else and say, y'all might want to check this information about COVID vaccine toxicity and alternatives to vaccination and actual treatment possibilities. And you can go to this website here and give a link to it in the email. So nobody has to go searching for anything. They just see the email. Takes about 10 seconds to read that. Click on the link. Bam, they go to the website of the data that, and actually now they have protocols like the FLCCC and so on and so forth that just lay it out line by line. Like if you want to have prophylaxis against COVID in general, do this. If you want to treat COVID early, do this. If you're in the middle of a COVID infection, do this. And those particular protocols and documentation actually link to all the references upon which they're basing their recommendation, unlike the CDC or the FDA. So hopefully you can imagine now the power and the reach and the effectiveness and the speed of a local group of 300 like-minded conservative Republicans, and also the indirect effect of that group that is that's kind of disorganizedly organized, that shares information and action plans, the effect of the people that they know, who don't need to be a part of the group, but they get the information and action plans just in, by osmosis. And think about if every geographical area, like a district or, precinct or ward or whatever, had a local group of connected Republicans. Also think about the fact that since it's local, like we're going back to that paranoid example about the FBI on your door, citizens can come together, members of this 300 and anybody they bring along, on a moment's notice virtually, or within 24 hours notice, to any particular event that needs rapid intervention. Let's say a last minute vote by the city council or the school board on a pretty heavy topic that obviously was not, publicized well prior to the vote coming up. What a coincidence. Anyway, imagine the power of being able to marshal that force that quickly. to marshal phone calls, to marshal door-to-door activity, to marshal, showing up at a particular place or time, such as the school board. And think about the support that provides. You're not just getting together with conservatives or Republicans over a county area, and here, there, and everywhere. You actually have local people that you can share with and get together with if you want to, and can get to know personally, even if you don't want to, do anything socially. And think about the fact they're only like walking distance or nearby car drive away, and that you're plugged in, that you're no longer alone and don't have a way to reach fellow citizens that have the same concerns you do, and want to answer the question, like, what can I do? What can I do to stop the craziness? What can I do to get back to a country of Beaver, Cleaver, and Bothernose Bess and Patty Duke? Well, we're never going to get back to all that, but at least get back to, Martin Luther King's judge a man by the content of his character, not the color of his skin mentality. How do we get back to that? How do we get back to everybody working hard to fight against racism and to judging people individually and not being bigoted and accepting everybody, or tolerating everybody, and just wanting everybody to do okay, be happy, get along well in their life, be safe, not have criminals roaming the neighborhood, not have meth or now fentanyl flooding the streets, people that just kind of want to live and be left alone by politics and the government. Think of the power of such a group, locally, county-wide, state, national, especially if they end up linking together. And you can be part of this. The big ask is pretty much to share your email address and other contact information you feel comfortable sharing with me, and I'll put that together into a Hotmail Outlook, Microsoft Outlook group. We'll do more secure stuff later as I figure it out or we figure it out together, and put everybody in a group, and then you'll get a group invitation. It's going to be by invitation only. No one else is going to get access unless you give it to them. We're going to be having dialogue that is pretty milquetoast. Probably the most important thing to remember about secure communications is you don't want to say anything that you would not want to be read aloud on the radio. I know it's kind of weird, but kind of like 1984 when the lead character Winston, they have like listening devices in the forest that he and his girlfriend go out to. But it's best to be very circumspect, even in our communications in the group. Another security feature of the group will be if everybody gets an account on what's called Proton Mail. Proton Mail is one of the most secure email services that encrypts communications end to end. So any emails you get are encrypted on your computer, they're encrypted on the receiver's computer, and they're encrypted from the company. So even the Proton Mail company can't access the email. It's behind an encryption wall even from them. And there's I think one email service that is a little more cumbersome to use. I was checking it out, called Tutanota, and it allegedly is even more secure than Proton Mail. But the good thing about Proton Mail is that most of us get accounts with that, and when we're communicating member to member within the group, and quite often that's going to be the level of communication. The group members are going to communicate with each other. They're not going to go through the group once they know each other and how to contact each other. And if they both have Proton email accounts, then all the communications are encrypted and secured. Of course, if somebody knows your computer sign-on password and your email sign-on, then they would have access to your emails, of course. But Otherwise, they're only known to you and can only be known to you. And so that's a nice security feature, I think, for us to have. And in the future, I plan to migrate the group over into something like a Proton Mail contact group, so that even the group itself is password protected and encrypted. So when you send messages to the group itself or vice versa, those are all encrypted as well. Now yes, it must be admitted that pretty much the National Security Administration, the NSA, and other law enforcement agencies have ways of cracking, even higher levels of encryption. But other than that, for routine hackers or people that want to dox you or stuff like that, this encryption is pretty good. A lot of top agencies and businesses, use even this. The nice thing about it, it's free too for just regular use. I don't want to get into the weeds more than that about security, just to let you know that the goal is to have a secure communication structure. I mean, I guess I will add, I always assume that any communications are going to be available to and potentially likely discovered by hostile actors. People that want to do mischief, people that want to cause problems, like I said, dox you or whatever, disrupt group communications, that's likely going to happen. But since it's going to be a flexible dynamic group, somebody's going to catch that among the group and pretty much notify everybody else, and everybody can just block whoever that is, that sender. Anyway, I hope you will think about sending me your email and other contact information, and so that I can add it to the group. Currently, I only have 350 invitations going out. The way I figured out who to send them to is that there are several databases that you can have access to, Republican databases, campaign databases, and I kind of collated all of that to find the households with the most likely Republican voters who have voted repeatedly and consistently in elections. And so of course, they could have moved away and there could be a staunch leftist in that house now, and so they'll send me their address, etc., and they'll have access to communications. But what can you do? You have to start somewhere. So it's a limited invitation group, it's restricted access, and hopefully even more secure in the near future. I look forward to your joining and to communicating and having you communicate with all the members in the group individually and as a whole. And please consider the power of this particular structure. I haven't seen it put in place anywhere else, which is kind of weird, since they always talk about, hey, we need to have grassroots, activity and involvement. But the reason I thought about this is from a lot of different activities I was involved in, but I had the same experience for the last 10 years, like, in the Obama years especially. Tea Party movement, like, what can I do? I mean, how do I get involved and make a difference, because I can go to these meetings or those meetings, but it's just so, and then you have to track down how to contact the different people there. And, I don't know if you've been through that, but you kind of want to know especially when political information comes through and it's time sensitive. Let's say that FDA comment period we were talking about, or a bill coming up and you need to contact congressmen like today. There's really no place to go to tell people about the time sensitive issue, or to know enough really to react to it in a low impact way that's convenient and quick. And so that's why I wanted to develop a group that would allow rapid magnification of any of those concerns or that information. So I hope you'll join me, and I look forward to talking with you. If you do, give me a call if you have any questions. My cell number is 920-265-6030, 920-265-6030. And my email is bradlyles@protonmail.com. And you have my address in the letter that I sent, so you know I'm for real, I'm local. And thank you again for watching. Take care.